Okay. So this is, again, not a class on strategic, everything about China, but look at the position of China. I mean, look at the number of countries it borders. And look at the portion of the world. It goes from Japan and South Korea all the way down to Southeast Asia, all the way around to India, all the way around to the beginning of Europe, and then, of course, a huge border with Russia. So, I mean, no offense to all you Canadians on the line, but the United States has two borders, Canada and Mexico. So, I mean, let's be serious here. Who's in a better position to have neighbors around the world? Now, this is, and I know you won't be able to read this, but it's just an example of the fact that you have China begins with dynasties very much like the Egyptians do. Oop, there we go. 2100 is their first dynasty. You see that? Is that observable? No. You can't? Okay. And
Yeah.
then, so and that's how it's run. The Egyptians also have dynasties. And then you look at the more current, the 1368, that's the Ming Dynasty. There are representations of the Ming Dynasty. The Jing Dynasty is a lot, 1644, 1912. Then you have the Republic period, which is when Sun Yat-sen overthrows the warlords, but he never really controls the country. And then you have 1949 is when Mao Zedong sets up New China. So you should look at some of these dynasties to get periodic, because all these places that were built and that I'm mentioning to these palaces are all part of these dynasties. So here is outside my window. Pretty tall building, pretty crowded street below. That was just opportunity I took one morning. You can see how much traffic is traveling there. So this is the first morning we went to the Lama Temple, 15th century Ming Dynasty, where you burn incense and you pray. Uh, that is the wrong, I got the wrong one there. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. So this is the entrance to the Lama Temple. People showing up in the rain. Here they are burning incense in the rain that first day there, praying. You see all these people here. They're praying and holding incense.
I've been there, Larry.
You have?
Yeah, it was 10 years ago. Huli went twice actually, but we both danced there in Beijing and Shanghai.
Son of a gun. Oh,
Um,
wow.
we, you know the big spaceship theater in Beijing? Did you see that? It's
Which
like the Beijing Cultural Center. It's like a big bubble.
I
It
saw
looks
the bubble. I never had a chance to go in it.
so yeah, I got lost in there, but yeah, that's where we performed. Anyway,
So this is all the Lama Temple. And you can see the beautiful, that's my first tour guide in Beijing, Ronnie. But you look at the buildings. And this is from hundreds of years ago. And there's just people in the rain pouring into this place. So this is some of the Buddhas in the temple, some of the carvings of the temple. Now this is the lotus flower market in Beijing. It's a long walkway along the water, and it's all covered by a dragon. And I think that's, I have a duplicate in the beginning of that. Yeah. Okay. So it's all has this dragon at the end. I couldn't resist. But along the walkway of this lotus flower market is an ice cream store, same as the US gelato. See, that's Italian ice cream. Of course, a lot of it's in Chinese, but you can make out the gelato is in English. Now, here you go. This is the mountains along with the Great Wall was built. I mean, the mountains are, I didn't know the mountain range was like this. You may not know, all of you, that that's what I do. That's my leisure time is backpacking the mountains on the East Coast.
they had the Winter Olympics near here.
Yeah, I did, but I didn't put together. But you can see along the top ridge is a wall.
Yeah.
I decided not to walk the wall. I wanted to climb the wall. So that's what I did. My guide, Ronnie, she wouldn't go up with me. But you see, it just keeps going up and up, and it goes up, and then there's a rest station because they know people can't make the whole distance. So here you have a toilet and food because you can't make it the whole way. So there I am with the still climbing with the Great Wall behind me. And then there's the Great Wall Museum, which I didn't get a chance to go into. So this is the Southern Palace. Now, unfortunately, my camera didn't work. So the most beautiful place, I don't have good picture. You can see behind the lake over there. And this area where these people are sitting, this is a long corridor that's decorated with Chinese art and history. And people just come pouring into these places by the thousand. Here, this is the map of the Summer Palace. You see the lake on the bottom, and then it has, in Chinese, all the different buildings and places you can look at. Uh, this place is gorgeous. I mean, I grew up in New York. I love Central Park, but Central Park doesn't hold a candle to this. I've never seen, I mean, in the United States, we have parks in the wilderness. We have Patapsco Park in Maryland. We have 54 national parks, which people go to with lakes and you climb the mountains, and I've done that. But I've never seen a place as beautiful as the Summer Palace. And unfortunately, uh, my camera did not help me out there to help you. This is the Temple of Heaven. And people come. This is a woman, and they dress up in traditional garb when they walk through these places to celebrate their history. And you see hundreds of women dressed up in traditional garb. Here's two more. You can see them, and they take pictures, they walk around. It's a very pleasant atmosphere. This is the Temple of Heaven. This is the map of the Temple of Heaven. You can see how big that is. This is me the first day of the conference, Thursday morning. And behind me, that's the registration. So there I am, all dressed up, ready to participate. This is just one picture near me. I mean, you can see the media jammed. You see, well, there are non-Asians, but you can see there's a lot. There's military everywhere. And of course, it's dominated by Chinese. This is the theme of the conference, promoting peace for a shared future. And this here, this fellow in the middle, that's Professor Wu, and this is Rick Waters. And this is a well-known personality from CG and TV. So they are picking apart U.S.-China policy. And they did this two more times in different venues. Here's another venue. There's a workshop, and there's Waters again. Wu is not at that. This guy in the middle is from Rand Corporation. And they're again discussing U.S.-Africa policy. He says it's the right way for China and the United States to get along. So then there was a special dinner for a handful of delegates. I was given a invitation for that. And here's just a young, I think he's an admiral already, a really young guy who's worked his way up totally into the Navy. And we're chatting Thursday night, I guess that was. This is the one lady who wanted a picture taken with me. She's from Ghana, one of the very few Africans who are not speakers. You can see behind her, we were sitting in an audience of Chinese military at the time. This is the South African defense minister addressing the conference. This was the plenary session. So these seats up front were all the dignitaries, and the seats in the back is where you see we were sitting. This was, oh, I'm missing my nameplate here. Oh, Fooey. Oh, well, I missed it. This was me speaking at the forum on China and Africa. And this was one of the other speakers. You can see behind me more military, but other than that, Chinese. The woman on the end is a Chinese cadet in the military. These guys are from, say, Eastern European country. But I misplaced a picture I had. I'm sorry about that. Um, so here's me speaking to the conference, this workshop. This fellow here on my right side is from Hungary, and this fellow here is an American. This is Dr. Ada Wang. She was the main coordinator of the conference, and she was very helpful to me. This is the last day we were departing. That I guess that was Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon. Yeah. So here's downtown Beijing. That's the tallest building in Beijing. And you can see this is the whole financial sector, business sector down there, similar to what you see in the US. So here I am. I'm taking the high-speed rail in the station. So here's my ticket. Leave at 11 o'clock and arrive at 15:37. So we deduct 12. We arrive at 3:37. And for less than $100. So this is the high-speed rail. So it's using rails, but it's figured out the technology to move. Here's the front of it. That was taken from a window, so it's not the clearest picture. There's the station, typical, much cleaner, much more organized train station. So this is pictures taken from my train window along the way. We're passing through major cities as we go from Beijing to Shanghai. And again, look at the size of these buildings. Just huge. And that's all you see. So here's one of the major cities. And I'm not sure, I don't think this is Shanghai. So you see buildings on either side, and then you see masses of yellow taxi cabs going into the city. These are dotted all along the East Coast. So this is Shanghai. Some tall buildings there, one right after another. So this is a store along the walkway in Shanghai, not that this dumplings, all kinds of dumplings, all kinds of delicious food. I told my wife after I came back that you can't really call what we order here Chinese food. There's no resemblance to Chinese food, none. So we have to just call it Chinese American food, but it's not Chinese food. Chinese food was delicious. Fried rice, noodles, dumplings, these little bins they put together. So this is Shanghai. We took a boat on the water here. This is called the Bund. This because it stands for the waterway. And on one side, this side here is modern Pudang. And on the other side, what you don't see is old Shanghai, where the colonials, British, and everyone built their buildings. So this was always a major trading post because it's on this waterway. But it was always controlled by the colonial powers. So this has only been developed since New China, which is 1949, but I don't think it was even developed then because of the difficulties the country had in starting out. So that's my Margarita is the name she went by. That was my guide in Shanghai. And you look behind her, she didn't like the sun very much. Lights again. But behind us, you see the whole skyline. It's all modern. So this is the, let's see, Jade Buddha Garden. This is now Shanghai. I don't know if you made to this place, Nick, but this place is filled with statues. And they have rows and rows, and they all have different meanings, and they're all holding different structures. Let's see the next one. Oh, this one. This one's fun. So you can see one guy is a guy in war, angry. Next person has an umbrella. It's more peaceful. And they have one Buddha temple after another. This is Jade, and that's a male not a female. There were no female Buddhas.
I remember this one a lot.
Oh, you do.
Yeah, and I've seen one of these in Bangkok too, which is even bigger, huge.
But you would think it's a female by the hips and the face, but it wasn't. And there's a whole row of these.
Yeah.
And here's a whole row of Buddhas, each one symbolizing a different god based on a different relationship. You could see the faces are different. This is one more decorated, but this was not the tallest Buddha. Here's one of the many gardens, and all all these things. There's writings on all this stuff, but they're just beautiful places to walk. This is the same garden. What happened to the other gardens I had? Oh, well, I somehow, let's see. Well, I'm missing some pictures. So here's again a close-up shot of downtown. And here's your maglev, no wheels. And so I took a picture of the maglev. Here it is coming in, and these are all magnetic polarity. And here it is approaching. So that takes care of. I missed out some on pictures here and there, but I think you got the gist of it. So, if there's any questions, be happy to.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so
Are
much, Larry. The photos were awesome.
And that's only a small sample.
Magda, do you want to begin? Do
no,
you want to?
I just technical question. Are they using maglev trains more for short distances or long distances?
The 28 miles from Shanghai to Pudong Airport is the only maglev in the world. There is no other operating maglev. I was confused myself about that.
The only commercial one you can buy tickets for.
Correct. For $6.
Yeah.
Less than it costs to go from Baltimore to DC.
Mm. Okay, so let's get on with the questions. We have some already in the comment section. Um, I'm going to give 5 seconds if people would like to ask the question themselves. So, Ginger, would you like to ask your question yourself, or would you like me to read it out? I'm Ginger.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
we now.
Okay. Yes. No, I just had a question about where to find reliable information about China. And because in the beginning, you said that it was easy to find information. And I think so I so I've been searching a lot and I found a site on bricks and then found out that it was kind of a perverted site on bricks and there's more reliable information than was found on this site. So I wondered, yeah, I just wanted some tips on
Well,
where Larry goes for.
well, I mean, I start my whole process from I call myself a physical economist. So I'm always looking for indications of the growth of the physical economy, not the monetary side. So that's why I look at railroad kilometers. I look at life expectancy. I look at energy. And then you look at it over time. You just put it on a timeline. And you begin, that's how it's not that difficult to measure economic progress. I mean, there's a lot of reports, I mean, that come out from inside China, which on their policies, obviously the government sites have a lot of their technical support for this. And then, of course, all of the places I named, which in terms of places to see, you can look them up on the internet. The Forbidden City, the Lama Palace, the Summer Palace. But a lot of it I learned I mean, my enrichment of China, aside from reading some cursory history books, I've not done an in-depth study, was talking to a lot of people while I was there. I mean, that's the advantage of being on the ground. That's gives me also, because it's not that their information is what I repeat, but their information gives me an insight of how to look at it, how to understand what the country is doing. So it's not easy because it's the propaganda against China is so intense. It is very hard to get a good understanding. I don't know if Nick has any suggestions. I can't give you a book or topic. I mean, my wife spent 10 years reading original sources of Confucius, of the followers of Confucius, of Sun Yat-sen, of the various dynasties, of the various emperors and empresses. I mean, there is no simple way of understanding China. It's an ancient culture that goes back getting close to 5,000 years, like the Egyptian culture. So there's no simple way of understanding.
Sure. But in terms of modern times, if you're looking for up-to-date news, I often use China Daily. They have actually quoted some of Larry's work already, and you have a relationship with them, right, Larry? China Daily, and also Xinhua.
Well, I have people I'm in touch with.
Yeah. So China Daily's one, and then Xinhua is another, and then CGTN, which is more global, and they do very good shows. CGTN, they do great documentaries on YouTube.
Correct.
And, they recently did an Africa series that I loved on basically lots of great Pan-African leaders. And they're
No.
about 30 minutes long. They did Thomas Sankara, they did Haile Selassie, they did Jomo Kenyatta, and they went through, and they're very dense, they're very well done, very well produced, with all the Western CGI too, right? So they've got that now too, which really makes China have a lot to offer in terms of media.
Yeah,
So
that's good examples.
those three are great. Let's move on to the next question. Thank you, Ginger. Yuri, I leave the floor to you, or would you like me to ask the question? I do it. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my question was about Halford Mackinder. It seems to me, this is a personal opinion, that uh, he is the crux of a lot of this zero-sum
Mhm.
ideology, which has poisoned the planet. And I was wondering if there was any discussion on Halford Mackinder, because part of his theory, after reading Professor Preparato's book on called Conjuring Hitler, he mentions how, with his heartland theory, how the uh, the West tries to control the heartland by inserting wedges into the heartland. To me, this is a perfect description of Taiwan and actually Israel too, Israel being what, 500 miles east of Constantinople, I guess. Uh, what a strange place. And I guess you could put Ukraine there too. And so I was wondering if there was any discussion among the plenary or among the political science people about it and what they thought about it.
There was not there was not a deep uh, what you might call theoretical discussions on these topics, because the problem at the conference is you're giving a few minutes here, a few minutes there.
Yeah.
So I mean, I was the one who pushed more than everybody else to get a discussion on the rules-based order, which all the Africans were very hesitant to even discuss that. And they were very hesitant to discuss the Western domination of
Uh-huh.
policy. One of the questions I've not answered for myself, I mean, I know a fair amount about the creation of the United States around the American system of political economy in Hamilton. And I'm not, don't know exactly, and I did ask this question among some think tanks, how did the Chinese end up with an understanding. Now, whether they of the same system, in other words, they've actually used ideas that we would say came from Hamilton, but maybe they came from somewhere else. But they ended up later, much later, after the new China was created and after the failures of the Cultural Revolution, they began emulating those policies.
Yeah.
And I would like to know how the Chinese came to it. I mean, even if you look earlier at Sun Yat-sen
Right.
writings, I mean, he puts out I have a copy of a very detailed grid of a railroad system for all of China.
Yeah.
I think in 1919, I'm thinking. Uh, so where did he get that from? Now, he went to school in Hawaii, and that is maybe influenced by the United States, but somehow the Chinese figured out the way around this control by the West that looks very similar to our American system on the Hamilton. And that's a nice riddle that I do want to discover it, find it out as I get more involved in China.
Well, Matt has done a lot of work on the American system as well as Anton Chaikin
Yep,
also,
yep.
and of course Cynthia Chung, and even Webster Tarpley at one time. Of course, I think he's kind of blown his head with TDS, but
Also,
uh,
Nancy Spanis has written 2 books on it.
on the American system.
Mhm.
Well, I found that extremely interesting, and then reading Matt's books on the two Americas. I
Mhm.
mean, for me, that really did a 180 on my. I mean, I had like a 1619 image of America. These are all evil white guys and blah blah. No nuance. Just and it really did a 180 on me. I thought it was extremely interesting, and I think somewhere in there, Matt explains how Sun Yat-sen came to the American system, and I was shocked. Actually, one of the small vignettes on how the American system, the American Revolution was admired globally was, Lafayette.
Yep.
And there was even an American ship named after a Muslim. It's the Haidar something, the Haidar Ally, Haidar Ali was
Federally,
an American revolutionary ship that was, well, you talk to some people who believe in the old American high school history and ask them, gee, why do you think they named a U.S. revolutionary ship after a Muslim? And their eyes just kind of start swiveling, but it's a very interesting uh,
Yes.
anecdote. Oh, well, that's it. That's all I wanted to say.
By the way, I don't, I mean, I don't know if you've gotten a hold of it, but as I mentioned very early, on my website, lawrencefreemanafricanworld.com, which you can subscribe to, there are
Uh-huh.
2 articles on the conference. And one is my presentation to the workshop that I was in. And
Right.
one of them says Freeman addresses Shanghai conference, and I think the other says China is not an enemy but could be a partner for development. And I go into a more deeper discussion there, especially
Mm-hmm.
my remarks on the commonality of development between all people, because all
Yeah.
commonality of development is universal based on the fact that human beings are created with the capacity for creative thought. And that creative thought only exists in human beings and exists as a potential in every human being. And I suggest in my presentation in China that forms the basis of policy for how people should conduct their foreign and economic policy is the commonality or the universal quality of creative thought. So
Yeah.
you might be,
Well, it almost brings me to tears when I see our leaders uh, with their insanity, their fever in the mind. I don't know what it is, but it's just their policies, their thoughts, their statements.
that
It
makes sense.
me, a normal American, well, I don't know if I'm normal, but an American citizen, it brings me to tears. I wonder if the Chinese that you met realize how many of us there are. I don't know because I don't get out much, but how many of us there are out here who are 100% opposed
Yeah.
to our government. Do they know that?
I'm not sure. I mean, I have found throughout I've been at this now. I started politically organizing when I was a teenager, 17. But over
Right.
the last 30 years, I've found that foreigners have an extraordinarily difficult time understanding the United States. Now, most
So
Americans,
do I, and I live here.
right. So most Americans have a problem. Most Americans have never read anything about American history, the Federalist Papers, Hamilton's four reports. So Americans don't know much. So you got to give the foreigners a break because they just
I
they
do.
can't wrap their head around American
I
politics.
do. You know, when I was in Europe in 2007, I went to Europe and Russia. I talked to people and I tried to, a lot of them were still with the old American, they're for freedom and, the God bless America. And, you just could not explain to them what was happening, what was really happening.
Very hard.
Well, that's what you do when you go to a different country, the Chinese probably can't explain to me, a Chinese dissident probably can't explain to me what's happening, you know. Um,
Okay.
well, that's very interesting. I hope we find a way out of this. The current situation is uniquely frightening. Okay, thanks for your presentation.
Moving on to the PD. Pip, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you so much, Nick. Larry, I found that so uplifting. It really, really was so enjoyable. And I'd like to ask you, if you were to advise African governments how best to emulate China's economic growth and achieve meaningful poverty reduction, could you please choose 5 key points?
Well, I've discussed this actually even recently with a prime minister from one of the African countries. And I explained to him, even before I went on my trip to China, I said, China did it. How they do it? And we discussed back and forth. He's from a West African nation. The fact that there was a commitment by the leadership of the country, China, to move ahead with one, manufacturing. You have to have a manufacturing sector. You can't eliminate poverty. You can't resist colonialism or neocolonialism. So you need manufacturing. You need infrastructure. You cannot proceed without infrastructure. And if you go back, in Tony's book on the United States and Nancy's books, they make that very clear. And Hamilton makes it very clear. Those are two key sectors that have to be pushed from the top down, as dirigism does. You have to have credit to make those sectors work, to advance credit over a 10, 15-year period of time. You have to have a resolute leadership. The Chinese developed a leadership that said, we are going to do this. We're going to do it. And the Chinese people, when you talk to them, they have that mentality as well. There was a decision made that we're going to do this. And by doing this, we can have a better way of life and we can be independent, not isolated from, but independent of the Western policies. So there's very simple things. And the problem with the Africans is they can't agree on a course of action. Because in Africa, you really want to do this African-wide. They can't come together and agree that this is the most important thing we do and that we put everything else behind it. There's still, some people are still discussing colonialism. Now, colonialism still has an effect on the thinking in Africa. But we need a group of leaders who will honestly sit down, have a discussion on forming a leadership and identifying the goals of what must be done and how to do it and not be deterred by any other factor. That doesn't exist in Africa among most people I talk to. They don't have that kind of resolve, right? Maybe Leibniz called it virtue, to adopt an idea and then commit to it because you know it's right. You've identified what has to be done and you do it. And you don't let anything stop you. The military, I've never been in the military, but if you read the reports of military fighting, when you have to have an objective, to take an area, you do it, and there's nothing that stands in your way. We sadly, and I'm not being condescending, that doesn't exist yet in enough people in Africa to make it work.
Very well
Thank you
said.
so much.
Yeah. Uwe, I like your comment about the maglev train because it's so true. The technology is actually from Germany, and China did incorporate the technology. They were actually helped by Germany when their relationship was a lot better and looking a lot more optimistic than it does now. So, do you want to say anything more about it, Uwe? Like, what was the staged accident? Just out of interest.
Sorry, please repeat your question.
What was the staged accident regarding the maglev train in Germany that was built close to you? Because it's still there, if I believe, right?
Well, no, the track is being demolished, and they literally so they collided two trains. They had a technical car on the track when the maglev train was running. It was an eight shape of track, and so they collided the test train into the technical train, and it was a tremendous accident. And since then, the whole thing has been demolished. It was a complete fabrication. Germany had discussed at one time to have the track going from Berlin to Cologne. So this would really have been a huge leap in terms of time savings and also technology experience. And eventually then they said, okay, we're going to do it in Munich to go to the airport, which would have been just a 5-minute ride or something. But anyway, they didn't even do that, but they sold it to Shanghai, and that's where they built it. And it's a huge strategy for Germany.
Yeah, it's amazing, huh? The kind of paradox in that, how quickly China incorporated someone else's idea and then executed it, like understood it and executed it with such
That
like
was part of the plan. I mean, in other words, my understanding is, I'm not an expert, but my understanding is part of Deng Xiaoping's going out and opening up was to go out and learn and study the most advanced systems and bring them back before China then began to invent them herself, which she's now arguably the leader of the space program, which is new ideas. But in the beginning, they were copying ideas any way they could find them.
Yeah. I mean, as you were talking about maglev before, I did a little search because I know it's all kicking off in China at the moment, the commercialization of maglev, right? Keep your eyes open because this is all happening as we speak. Like they are planning to build a maglev line between Beijing and Shanghai. So they've just broken another theoretical boundary the other day where they now say that they can do 1,000 kilometers an hour plus in a test tunnel. So they actually did that on a test trial in a vacuum where there was a minimal amount of air, no friction, and they're able to achieve these speeds because actually they're going so fast now that the air became a problem. Yeah. So that's how far they took Germany's technology in like 2006, 2008, just when they were beginning to build the high-speed network. They hadn't built a single high-speed track before 2006.
Really?
Yeah.
When did
It's only been 18 years, and in 18 years they built 42,000 kilometers of high-speed rail.
Yeah.
They only took Germany's idea for maglev in around the same time, so they were already thinking of the next quantum leap after high speed, and now they're bringing maglev into reality. And I reckon before 28, we will see the first bona fide 1,000 kilometer plus long track in the world, which is commercial maglev, and we'll probably do a 750, 800 kilometer an hour.
So when we
You know when the Chinese completed the 28-mile track they have now between Pudong and Shanghai?
It was already like 2009, 2008. It was really quite a while ago because the Germans had already figured it out. That's the thing. The Chinese saw what they'd done. They were like, "Oh, this is brilliant." Everybody knows how brilliant the Germans are when it comes to scientific development and executing also. And so the Chinese, of course, took the paperwork, and of course there wasn't much left to do other than build it. And that's what makes it so ridiculous that what Uwe was talking about didn't get realized.
Yeah,
Because Berlin to Cologne is probably Germany's most important economic line.
yeah, could be.
Creates more money than all of Germany, and would have drastically changed the living condition of everybody living along there, which is probably most of Germany's population too. And you would have seen, yeah, just so much change in the real estate market, in energy markets, in the cost of living, in everything. So
Back in the day, if I may, so high schools were being invited to go there and see it, and even ride the train. So I rode the train,
wow.
And it was going 400 kilometers an hour. So it was not very fast compared to I mean, today rail high speed goes 400 kilometers, but still it was amazing. And this whole thinking was never present, at least not in German mainstream society, of what you can do with those quantum leap thinking in terms of potential. This was never taught to Germans. It was always something which was kept in a box and was very, very elite, and the main population was kept deliberately away from it, so that there was always resistance to this idea. And you had always those stakes where the track was to be built on. It was really made how do you say, PR against the whole idea.
Yeah. Thank you. Jerry, do you want to ask your question? Because also it's about space, and it is the aerospace, China's aerospace industry that is developing maglev. So this all comes full circle.
Okay, yes, I have a question. Larry, I was going to say, I'm so jealous that you got to go to China, but jealous is a bad word. So I want to say happy. I'm so happy that you got to go, and maybe someday me and my wife will get to go. But I wanted to ask you a question on because the conference you were at seemed to be about, the possibility for the United States and China working together. And I know one way I've thought, and I'm sure other people have thought, is through collaboration on the space program. And I really like watching what China has done in the last period, landing on the far side of the moon. And I was reading, they brought back rock samples from the moon, and they're now offering it for research to other countries. But the United States can't look at it because they have this crazy thing called the Wolf Amendment, so that they can't work with China on the space program. So, well, other countries in the world can. But anyway, I just wanted to know if this idea of collaboration in space was brought up at that conference you attended. And the second part question, if you actually got to talk to any people in China about what they thought of the space program, because I would think they'd be very excited and very proud of what China has accomplished. So that's my two-part question for you, Larry.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for you, Jerry. The conference was so focused on security and defense matters that it was narrow in terms of going into the more interesting areas that you're bringing up. There were other panels that were on strategy in the Pacific Ocean, strategy with Europe. I don't know if they touched on those or not. I was trying to go to everything that was China, America, but I didn't see that. That doesn't mean they're not thinking about it. It just didn't come up. This forum is probably not the forum for that, because it's narrowly focused on the type of questions I've already brought up. So I don't really know any more about their thinking other than you do and what we read about what they're accomplishing. But I mean, their attitude, and again, the United States will tell you, and some of my friends will tell you, and my military friends, oh, you can't believe the Chinese. You can't believe them. They're just brainwashing you. And I used to teach a class on Africa and China, and I said to one of the older people in the class, I said, So do you think I'm a card-carrying member of the Chinese Communist Party when I give the So he said, no, Larry, I just think you've been duped.
Well, at least he was honest.
So, I mean, that's the problem. I mean, the problem is there's nothing I could tell in this meeting with the Chinese, and I'm still reading and talking to people there and talking to people here in Washington actively. I don't see anything that is other than collaboration. I think they would want a lot more collaboration. But if you listen to Blinken and you listen to this guy Waters, who was more or less representing the U.S., there were restrictions. I mean, the U.S. has, you have to commit to this and you have to commit to that. You have to accept all rules of democracy. You have to accept all rules of fair elections, all rules of human rights. And they're not willing to collaborate, and because they don't see the potential. You know, when I looked at the statistics that I went through to here and in my articles, it jumps out at you. What did this country accomplish in 35 years? That's less than half my age. How did they do it? Isn't that something we'd want to know about? We don't have to become members of China, but don't you want to know how they did it? Shouldn't the U.S. be inquisitive enough, curious enough? This was done. And the ideology restricts the mind and the Americans from having this kind of outlook. And I'm not saying the Chinese are perfect, but they're willing to collaborate, and they've done some amazing things. So why don't we find areas that we can work together? I mean, there are a few, but there's very few. And it's very sad, and it's a strategic error, and an error that could be dangerous. Because I did tell the Chinese, I mean, I follow Washington pretty closely. And I would say on any day of the week, of any given week, somebody has written a paper or is holding a conference about China's plans to take over Taiwan and how the United States has to militarily preempt that from happening. Those are the discussions that take place in the United States instead of areas that we could have joint missions together. And my proposal at the conference in detail, and I've made it to the United States as well, the United States and China break out of the rules-based order and have a joint mission to eliminate poverty in Africa. Just start there, and we'll see the results, and we can use that as a stepping stone for further collaboration.
Wonderful. Yeah. No, yeah, it's the development of a virtuous aristocracy. I think we're definitely lacking that. Like someone I listen to a lot on that regarding China is Dr. Kwan, who does a lot of articles on the Chinese aristocracy and how well they were raised. And I think we're definitely lacking an aristocratic generation in the West at the moment. So,
you know, Confucius was only born 50 years apart from Socrates.
yeah.
And when I was in Greece, I went to the Agora, which is where Socrates taught, where St. Paul preached. And the Athenian government did something very intelligent. They built a statue. I have a picture of me. They put a statue of Socrates next to a statue of Confucius.
Yeah.
So that I thought was pretty intelligent by the Greeks, because these were guiding philosophies for Western culture, for Eastern culture. And there's many points of connection and similarity which we could build on. I'm quite knowledgeable about Socrates, not so much about Confucius. But this is what we can do. And we don't even want to think that way. What is wrong with us that we don't even have the curiosity to explore these areas of potential? I agree with the previous speaker. I'm very sad and dismayed sometimes of my fellow Americans, much less my political leaders. That's what's forced me to write my last article on my website and Substack on using Tony Jakin's book to explore the reasons why the United States is not thinking carefully in this presidential election.
Absolutely. I see we've got hands raised, but I'm gonna stay in line as much as I know. I think Kelly was next. Kelly, can we have your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, Lawrence, I really enjoyed your enthusiasm when you're describing your trip to China. Um, I've always recognized the country for many years that they were going to grow, when they were a third world country. And I've always mentioned it to like my peers around here where I live, like I'm in Canada. And no one ever seemed to, it was always like an indifference or a fear, they're communist, stuff like that. So, yeah, I enjoy your enthusiasm about it. And so, what am I trying to get at here? There is no enthusiasm like where I live. And when I try to promote it, like the way you are, I get all this negative stuff back. In particular, like things like that they're like a communist country and they persecute Christians. You can't like a Christian person can't like sort of like be a part of it, and it's all bad and negative. I just wonder what your experience is
Oh, yeah.
when you were there.
Well, my experience when I was there and my experience here is I know some people, some younger than me, some in my age bracket, who are friends of mine. Uh, and I do some, as I said earlier, some long distance hiking and backpacking in the mountains for weeks at a time with them. And I just have to ruthlessly make fun of them because they, like many people, just follow this propaganda. They imbibe it and it's been inculcated in their minds that the American people, they don't understand anything about China. And they don't want to understand. They just repeat this propaganda against China. And uh, I mean, some people I've been able to persuade to think about it differently. Many I have not. But it's an uphill fight. But it's not China per se. I mean, in this case, we're talking about China. The problem is that the United States has been dumbed down. And I think we can say the starting point may be the assassination of Kennedy and the whole into 1968 assassinations. So, Americans don't think. We'd rather have 100,000 people sit in a football stadium and then millions more right now while we're having our conversation, millions more watching on TV. I mean, spectator sports is worse than the sport itself. That's the problem. The problem is people have given up thinking. And Benjamin Franklin and the founding fathers knew this was a problem. And he said, when he was asked, what kind of a country have you given us? And he said, a republic, if you can keep it. Because if you look at our Federalist Papers and the founding fathers, they depended on an educated citizenry. We don't have an educated citizenry. We have a dumbed down citizenry. I'm not saying Republican or Democrat. Are my fellow citizens who now, I've been around for a long time. At 73. I've been watching this for 56 years since I was in high school. And I've seen people get dumber and dumber, and the culture is dumber. Like, look at the example I gave. In Beijing and Shanghai, they walk to beautiful historical gardens and palaces. In Baltimore, we walk to 2 stadiums. That metaphor gives it all away. That's the problem with us. And the younger people don't even read history. This last article I wrote on the election, I got more responses from elderly people writing me saying, I wish my children and grandchildren would learn this because it's gone. So we have to create a renaissance we need Socrates and Confucius and Brunelleschi and everybody else we can get to come here to change the United States culture. So China is just one example. It's a good example of dumbness, of ignorance, of prejudice, but it comes from not being educated. There's no limit to our power of thinking, but you have to develop your mind to think. And I run into the same problem you run into, is that people try to dismiss what I'm saying. And if I know them well enough, I'll crack jokes. If I don't know them too well, I may walk away or be more subtle. My wife thinks I'm too blunt. But the fact of the matter is, there is no simple solution. You individual, I mean, I don't know you, but I'm saying you as a person and everybody as a person, you have to radiate optimism to challenge people's thinking.
Yeah, I try that hard.
Yeah,
They tell me I'm pretty blunt myself sometimes.
yeah, because I mean, working in Africa instilled this, because you can't work in Africa unless you're an optimist, because conditions there are ridiculous for the 21st century. It should never happen. So you have to be an optimist, and you have to radiate that optimism with humor and jokes and policies, but you can't let it defeat you, and you have to keep it up. I mean, I'm radiating my ideas now more effective than I was 5 years ago, and I'm continuing to expand. And we all have to have that approach, because the United States population is not what our founding fathers thought it should be or would be. And that is you can't underestimate how big a problem that is, to have a country, a republic that was anticipated would have educated citizens, and to have instead uneducated citizens. And I see the same problem in both parties. I'm not saying one party is stupider than the other. I think both parties are ridiculous, and their leaders are ridiculous. And it's unfortunate that we now mindlessly applaud to a soundbite or to a word, to a phrase, to a slogan. You hear mindless applause. We used to have people who could develop ideas over a couple of hours at a time. I mean, when Lincoln and Douglas debated, they debated on stage with very little notes for an hour and a half at a time, speaking to an audience on a dais. And people stood there and listened for an hour and a half to 2 hours to 3 hours. Now, that was only 160 years ago that people had that capacity for learning, just standing there listening to two guys debate it out.
Now you
I
can't
can't
even
imagine that happening today.
you can't even speak 5 minutes, and then they get bored of what you're talking about.
Right. That's why all the major candidates, they have their talking points and their narratives, and they know that. So rather than changing that, they reduce themselves to that.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's an uphill battle.
No, absolutely.
Well, I think it brings us actually to our next question, because it's one of education. So, John, would you care to jump on in here? Mr. John Wong, are you there? If not, I'll ask the question.
Looks like he's muted.
He is muted for now. Okay, I will ask it. Larry, are there many African students going to study in China in order to build better relations and to learn about their economic system and development?
Yeah, China, I mean, has a huge program of scholarships to study at the universities there. And there's a lot of Chinese who have permanently moved to Africa. Now, again, if you listen to the West, this is all manipulation. This is all brainwashing. But it's just not the case. I mean, there's a real effort to uplift and educate people in China. And of course, from the United States that many people tell you that the Asian students who come over the United States are usually the best students in the class. There's a real seriousness about ideas. One of the people I was talking to in China, the difference between having to pay for school and going to a state school, which the state pays for, is all based on your grades. And then therefore the parents will make sure that child passes because they can't afford not to. Make sure it gets high enough grades to go to a state-funded university. That's I mean, they have a very strong commitment to progress. And I forgot the figure, but I think it's in the, I can't remember the amount of scholarships. I know the FOCAC
I can
conference.
help you. I can help you. So in 2017, there were 74,000 Africans studying in China. Then in 2018, which is the last number we have, at least in Google, is 81,000. So it grew 6,000 from 17 to 18. You can draw up your own conclusions as to what it's now currently at in 2024. I'm going to say it's over 100,000 Africans studying in China, and there's over 35,000 Africans studying in Russia too. So around 150,000 Africans are studying in those two nations. And possibly I would like to stretch it to the fact that maybe I'd just like to float the idea that maybe they are organizing the future aristocracy that will partner with those universities and those ideas and centers of thought in China to bring about the economic development that we all know is possible in Africa. I mean, yeah. So next question, who was first, Monty or Magda? Monty, Magda.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Lawrence. I very much appreciate it. And you sparked a lot of remembrance and for myself, my history. I go back. I was a Vietnam vet in 1960s. I became involved with LaRouche in the mid 80s, just during the time that he was railroaded to prison, which you're probably familiar with. But my question relates to, given the deafening silence of this BRICS conference. I mean, in the West, they didn't even want to mention the term BRICS. You know, they kind of posed it as a conference by Russia against the United States, they don't want to mention it. It's completely blanked out in the Western collective West. And my question relates in reference to the BRICS, given that, and the idea of the science of physical economy, which most Americans in the West don't really have a sense of at all. And my question relates to what I would do is I'd go back to a guy by the name of Sergei Glazyev, who was a macroeconomics minister for Russia and the BRICS itself, and so far as the idea of the economy of the BRICS. And in 2022, he gave a speech just prior to the St. Petersburg conference thereafter, in which he gave a testament to LaRouche, very eloquent in 2022, saying that LaRouche was right, may his memory live forever. And given that LaRouche really was a key figure in the whole idea, at least in the West, of the ideas of physical economy, and he was promoting such things in the 90s of the World Land Bridge and the North America Water and Power Alliance and all of these things, and the development of this idea of the American system of political economy, which it appears to me the BRICS, that's really the basis of a lot of the tenets of the BRICS insofar as development. And given that it's obvious that at least in Russia, his ideas are fairly well known and they relate to that. Has it been your experience there's any recognition of that in China insofar as the role that he played in America? And of course, he's completely written out of history in America too, but it's just rather ironic to me that really the three primary wars we're in right now, at least in my mind, in the Middle East, in China, and over Taiwan, and in Ukraine, to me, it really appears a tragic irony that America is really fighting a war, a proxy war in these countries, not so much against these countries, but against BRICS itself and the idea of a multipolar world. Mm-hmm. That, to me, appears to be really the essence of it. And the tragic irony that the U.S. and the collective West is really fighting a war against what was the basis of the American system of political economy that it developed, which is now being promoted by the BRICS and these other nations. Could you comment on that, please?
Well, I don't disagree with anything you say. I mean, one point of clarification. We're in two wars. We're not yet in a shooting war over Taiwan, which is good news. We have two wars going, which is plenty. I have no discussion. I've not heard any discussion or anybody bring up anything in my about LaRouche in China. I'm not surprised. I don't, but maybe there are circles that do. But among the people that I was interacting with, it never even came up for a discussion. So I can't really give you a good answer. But what you said is correct.
Well, would you concur that, or what would be your comments insofar as the basic tenets of the BRICS, and so far as their economic development with the Belt and Road Initiative, with the SCO, with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? In other words, the basic tenets appears to be congruent with what used to be the American system of political economy itself, which was based on the science of physical economy. I guess that would be another way of putting it.
That's true. And I think I said earlier, I'm not sure how it all got transferred. I mean, one thing about ideas is once an idea is made public, it doesn't belong to any individual. It belongs to everybody at that point. So how did these ideas around the American system, we know through Pershine Smith and others, how it got to Japan. We know how it got picked up in Russia with Witte, with Hanato. But I don't know how it all got exported to Asia and to China, because it wasn't, I mean, some of the other Asian tigers, they didn't do exactly what China did, but they did very interesting things. I looked at some of their economies. They would take a portion of their capital budget and direct it into infrastructure manufacturing, which is something the Africans didn't do, although Ethiopia did a little bit. They actually had a conscious policy of building up infrastructure and manufacturing, which is why in some of the Asian countries, they're processing their agricultural products at a far higher percentage than the Africans are processing their agricultural products. They're selling them raw materials and then buying them back. So somehow on the Asian side of things, and China, of course, in particular, they adopted these policies. Where they came from, I don't know if you could say there's a direct line from one individual to another individual, but somewhere, and this to me is something I'm trying to understand and explore myself, is the realization of ideas across the globe, because there is great similarity. I mean, look at the development bank that the BRICS Development Bank is a bank based on development and credit. Now, this goes all the way back, even precedes Hamilton. There were concepts of using credit for development. So I can't give you the connections that how these ideas move from one place to another. It's something we have to continue to flesh out.
One thing that comes to mind is a few years back, I think it's 22, but when they did the military parade in Beijing, Xi Jinping had not just the image of Mao, but they made the conscious decision to put Sun Yat-sen also alongside Mao, and that was one of the first times they did that. And I would say that that's the major link with China and America. If we go back to the beginning of the foundation, and Sun Yat-sen, or not the beginning of the foundation, but the middle period where Lincoln comes into a lot of problems with Britain, Sun Yat-sen obviously learned a lot from Hamilton and these people, and I think there was a major transfer there in ideas. And Xi clearly knows about Sun Yat-sen and has read.
It's now official. I was talking to some people about this. it's now official that every 10-year celebration, they're going to include Sun Yat-sen in it. So it's not a one-shot affair.
So then we need to teach the Americans about Sun Yat-sen.
Oh, that would be great.
Because he's like an American. Like, close. An American Chinese, Chinese American. Okay, last but certainly not least, the magnificent Magda.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Wonderful presentation. So this, I hope it's not going to be so convoluted, but I'm trying to figure out in my mind, okay, I know that the Chinese government obviously is very aware of the attitude of the United States. Must be, okay. Then it strikes me, so why at a conference like this on security and economic cooperation, why the RAND Corporation is there? Why certain corporations or groups or whatever from the United States are in a conference like that when the Chinese government knows so well what the attitude is?
Yeah.
So can you enlighten me a little bit about that? Because that is really puzzling me. Okay.
Well, that was really interesting to me because, as I've said, I've been going to conferences in Washington for 30 years, and they're very one-sided. You don't get two sides to the discussion. So for me, it was an eye-opener, and I mentioned that in my article, to see the openness, the fact that they want to have this discussion. And this guy Waters, who I said, as I mentioned, worked for the Biden administration on China and Asia. He spoke at 3 different workshops that I'm aware of. So they wanted him, and they had him on the agenda constantly to have a debate. And this guy, Professor Wu, was sort of the most clear thinker who would undermine Waters' arguments. The RAND Corporation guy, everybody who was there had some connection to China. So the RAND Corporation guy was a China guy, and then there was some very small think tanks that were there. There was a former Assistant Secretary of Defense for China who was there, and he's no longer in the government. So there's no U.S. government spokesman. The military was there, which obviously all the U.S. government, they didn't speak. They were very low key. And many of them were in uniform. I mean, a lot of uniforms all over the place. So they wanted this debate. They wanted this discussion to come out. And they had very high-level interviewers, well-known, not to me, but well-known in China, newspaper people conducting interviews, moderating discussions. So the moderator was deliberately provocative and was very knowledgeable. I think, China wants this discussion. And then they, on their side, not on their side, but on the pro-development side, they had all these people from Asia and Africa there. And some of the Africans were well-educated. The guy from the Congo gave a very good presentation on development policy. So this is what they want. They want to have a discussion. They want to poke holes in this. I mean, when this guy Waters says we're really about competition, and Professor Wu says, well, you're not. You don't walk the walk. You just talk about it. And, frankly, that kind of discussion is very healthy. When I go to China discussions in the United States, and it's very one-sided. So a lot of it is anti-China, one level or another, some moderate, some intense. And I try to talk to these guys afterwards, and I don't find it that much substance to them. So the fact that it was so inclusive of diverse ideas really had an effect on me right away. I talked to my wife over the phone. I said, "This is really interesting, because you wouldn't see this anywhere else." I mean, I think the Chinese, they really believe that they're doing the right thing. And they don't have to tell anyone else what to do, but they're going to win people over by the success of what they're doing. I don't see in their publications, government publications, Communist Party reports, I don't see any bashing of the U.S. I just don't see it. Now, if you talk to the West, they say, wow, the Chinese are very clever. They're playing the long game. They're thinking 100 years from now. But I'm saying to myself, well, if they're thinking 100 years from now, that maybe the United States will collapse by then, or the West will change because it's not sustainable the way it's going, having wars going on constantly for a generation, 2 generations. So maybe the Chinese long game is that they will continue to develop their economy and their military and defend themselves, and the West will either adapt or collapse. But it was very refreshing to see the arguments, because to me, it was it was a learning experience, because I don't know China-U.S. politics as well as I know Africa. So for me, I gained an enormous amount of knowledge by watching this, and it's really healthy. And they've institutionalized it. I think this, if you look it up on the internet, I think the Beijing Zhengshan conference has been going on for a dozen or 15 years, and it's now considered to be a very important annual event where these discussions take place. I think it's going to continue. So
Do you think, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Do you think it could be kind of also the idea of emerging, not immersing these American groups into the alternative or the multiple multiple polar attitude, okay? To kind of expose them to it and see this is what the rest of the world thinks, and then they go back home to report.
Well,
okay.
They probably are bipolar as well, but
yes.
But the people I talked to in the delegation, of course, none of them knew me. They were all very suspicious of China, but they were not all of them. I think there's like 10 of them. I don't think I talked to all 10. They were not the most hardliner. I mean, I've seen much more aggressive attacks on China, papers written by the Brookings Institute, the Council on Foreign Relations. They all had some friendliness. Friendliness is wrong. They were not immune from having a good discussion with China. They weren't hardcore anti-China. They didn't think China was telling the truth. They think China was deceptive, but they were not China bashers. They weren't bashing China. So it was a select group. I mean, myself being the exception. So it wasn't people that they invited that were going to beat up on China. This guy Waters was the most moderate, articulate representative of the rules-based order China line. And of course, they would, like even this guy Waters would bring up, well, what are you doing in the South China Sea? And so then the Chinese would say, well, having your aircraft carriers and destroyers going through the Straits of Taiwan when you're 10,000 miles away, I don't see how that's really helpful. They would say to the American. And then this Waters would come by and say, yes, but there's the law of the sea. And then the Chinese would say, yes, but you haven't signed. The United States has not signed the law of the sea, even though they say it's like the ICC. They support the law of the sea, but we haven't signed it. Just like we support the ICC when we want to, but we've never signed it. So this was the back and forth that was going on. And as I said, for me, it was very educational. But it wasn't like these guys were coming out and saying, you're going to do this. They never said openly, you're planning on taking over the world. You want to be the #1 hegemon. They do say that in Washington, but there was nobody like that there. So, and then you think about all the other people. I mean, they gave a lot of time to the Iranian speaker. They gave a lot of time to a Russian speaker, Pakistan speaker, Singapore. I mean, they really had a whole world there. They even had a former diplomat from Ukraine there. I had dinner with him one night, and he presented his ideas. So that's good. I mean, it's good that they have the confidence in themselves that they can rebut these arguments and continue this dialogue. But the problem is that the the U.S. is making such a strategic error on not engaging with China in a more constructive manner. I just it became glaring to me when I was just talking to Chinese people. One night I was in Shanghai for 2 days. The first day it was the biggest typhoon since 1949. So I couldn't leave my hotel. You couldn't go on the streets. It was a typhoon. So that night I went out. And and then the next night I went out, I walked around and I got lost and it got dark. So I knew where my hotel was on my phone, but I didn't know how to exactly get to it. So I would stop Chinese people who didn't speak English. I'd say, I'm trying to find this hotel. So they would take out their phones and they would see these directions written in Chinese. And they would say, go here, go this way, go that way. And I stopped a policeman one night. They were more than happy just walking the streets of China, and there's this American coming up and bothering them about how to get instruction. They were more than happy to help. I just don't see this mentality that the West talks about in China. Now, I think Nick's been there more than I have, and maybe has his own observations. But I'm not saying there aren't people there who are not plotting this. There probably are. But I don't see that this represents China, that they want to be the number one hegemon.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Yeah, such a great and insightful class. It's awesome because you had the experience too, and it's something it's different when people have walked the steps and they've been to places like Tiananmen Square and they've seen the scale. And I love how you brought the old with the new, because of course people are hearing about new China, but there's this whole ancient China that existed right back with the Egyptians. And yeah, I mean, East and West is divided naturally, geographically for a long time. So not all of these conflicts are completely, ridiculous. Like there is a certain division geographically in the world, and it is hard to build bridges, and there are competing interests. And yeah, I am at the best of, like, I try and be an optimist on these things, and I have people like Larry to guide me in that. And even though each day it feels like it's sometimes getting worse, like we're still here, like, and we haven't had a great big chaotic war yet, and that's with lots of hot areas on the planet, but it does seem to be enough rationale to pull us through this. And yeah,
when you do this long enough, as I said, for me, it's over a half century. It becomes my optimism. I don't even think about it as a habit.
yeah,
What I do every day in my looking around the world and what I choose to write about and where I choose to go. This has been my life for so long. I don't think there's anything else I'd rather do. I don't even think about anything else. I'm just going to keep doing this as long as I can, because we have
and there's a certain immunity to fear there, right? Like over the time, I'm sure, like I'd like to think that maybe when you were younger, you were more worried, because I can sometimes worry too much about, like, the more you look into the geopolitics, you're like,
It is frightening.
Your breath is lost. But yeah, with the years and the steps and the traveling and the experience and the talking with people, you realize, okay, there's more grace.
Well, hopefully the United States will correct itself at some point. If it doesn't, Beijing is not a bad place to live.
No, not at all. Not at all. Moscow neither.
I mean, between the food and the palaces and the parks, I was telling my wife, it was really nice over there.
Yeah, it's such a paradox, isn't it? Because everybody has, just with Russia and China, such a communistic view. And then you go there and you've got all of this ancient classical culture, and it's preserved. So even the communists couldn't have been that bad, otherwise there'd be none of it left, Like how did all of that survive through communism?
Not only did it survive, it's accessible. It's a
Yeah.
train ride to go to these gardens and palaces.
Yeah, you don't need stadiums. You don't need fanfare or fun fairs or theme parks. You have culture. And yeah, no, like the Forbidden City is a 3-day walk. So there you go. Yeah, it's crazy. Larry, thank you so much. It's been a great class. Thank you everyone such good questions. It was really open discussion.
Okay, until we meet again.
Yeah, until the next one.
A bientôt.
Thank you. And everybody, take a look at Hyder Ali, what Yuri was talking about. It's directly related to BRICS, and it's a great article tying all of that together.
Where is the article?
I posted it on the chat section here. It's on the Rising Tide website. Also, go to Lawrence Freeman. I've posted his link here.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Lawrence Freeman in the World.
Very good.
There were other really insightful things that people posted too that were all connected to this discussion of America and its relationship with the world and BRICS. So,
we only have 2 weeks to go. We can move on to something else.
well, yes, let's see. Guys, have a wonderful rest of your Sunday.
Thank you. Good night.
Take care.
Take care.